You don't lose because you're not capable. You lose because you're trying to win battles God already promised to fight for you. Listen, not exhaustion is a signal. It's heaven's way of telling you that you're carrying something you were never designed to carry alone. You've been pushing, praying, stressing, and striving. But what if the breakthrough you're waiting for isn't found in more effort? It's found in surrender. Here's the truth. God doesn't respond to struggle. He responds to trust. The moment you stop fighting and start releasing, divine order begins to activate. Doors open, clarity comes, peace replaces pressure, and suddenly what felt impossible starts moving with ease. Today isn't about doing more. It's about letting go once. Because when you let God lead, He handles what you can't. And that's where miracles begin. Let me slow this down for a moment because this is where most people miss it. You are not weak. You are overloaded. There's a big difference. Weakness is when you refuse to move. Overload is when you've been carrying weight that was never assigned to you. And most of the exhaustion you feel right now has nothing to do with your capacity. It has everything to do with responsibility you picked up that God never handed you. Some of you are tired not because life is hard, but because you're trying to be God in situations where only God belongs. You've been managing outcomes. You've been replaying conversations in your head. You've been worrying about timelines. You've been stressing about how it's going to work out, who's going to help you, and what happens if it doesn't come together. And every time you do that, you're silently telling heaven, I got this, but you don't got this. And that's not an insult, that's an invitation. See, there are weights you're designed to carry, and there are burdens you're supposed to release. Responsibility is yours. Results belong to God. Effort is yours. Outcomes belong to God. Obedience is yours. Provision belongs to God. But somewhere along the way, you crossed the line. You started carrying results. You started carrying outcomes. You started carrying fear. You started carrying timing. And now you're worn out, frustrated, and wondering why peace feels so far away. Let me tell you something powerful. God never asked you to solve your life. He asked you to trust Him with it. Most people think strength looks like holding on tighter. Real strength looks like knowing when to let go. Because when you hold on to what God is trying to handle, you block what God is trying to release. That pressure you feel in your chest, that's not motivation. That's misalignment. That restless feeling at night, that's not ambition. That's anxiety from carrying divine assignments with human effort. And here's the truth most people don't want to hear. If you're overwhelmed, it's not because your problem is too big. It's because your surrender is too small. You don't need more hustle. You don't need more grinding. You don't need more late nights trying to think your way into a miracle. You need to put the weight back where it belongs. Some of you have been praying, God, give me strength. And God is saying, no, give me the burden. You've been asking for endurance, but what heaven is offering is exchange. You were never meant to carry betrayal. You were never meant to carry rejection. You were never meant to carry financial fear. You were never meant to carry uncertainty about your future. Those are spiritual loads, and spiritual loads require spiritual hands. Think about this. Every time you worry, you are rehearsing a future that hasn't happened. Every time you stress, you're trying to control something you can't command. Every time you overthink, you're attempting to outthink an all-knowing God. That's exhausting. And here's what makes it worse. You don't even realize you're doing it. You wake up thinking about the problem. You go to sleep thinking about the problem. You talk about the problem. You replay the problem. And then you wonder why peace won't show up. Peace doesn't arrive where control lives. Peace arrives where surrender lives. Let me say that again. Peace doesn't arrive where control lives. Peace arrives where surrender lives. You don't need to carry everything to prove you're strong. You need to release some things to prove you trust. Because the moment you stop trying to be the source is the moment you reconnect to the source. And when you reconnect to the source, you stop leaking energy. You stop bleeding focus. You stop wasting emotional currency on situations you cannot change. You finally breathe again. And here's what happens when you release what was never yours. Clarity comes back. creativity comes back, joy comes back, sleep comes back, hope comes back, not because your circumstances instantly changed, but because your position changed. You moved from striving to trusting. You moved from carrying to casting. You moved from fear to faith, and that shift changes everything. So today, I want you to stop calling yourself weak. You're not weak. You've just been carrying what was never yours, and it's time to put it down. Let's go deeper, because this next part is where trust gets real. God doesn't need your help. He needs your trust. I know that sounds simple, but for most people, it's the hardest lesson they'll ever learn, because we've been trained to fix things. We've been conditioned to figure it out. We've been taught that if something isn't working, you push harder, think longer, and try another angle. And that works in business, that works in school, that works in life. But when it comes to God, that mindset becomes the very thing that blocks the miracle. See, there's a difference between participation and interference. God invites you to participate through obedience. But when you start trying to manage outcomes, you move from participation into interference. You start advising God. You start rushing timing. You start forcing doors. You start negotiating with fear. And then you wonder why things feel heavy. Let me tell you something straight. God never asked you to understand the process. He asked you to trust the promise. Most people don't struggle with faith in theory. They struggle with faith in practice. They say they believe, but their actions say they're still in charge. They pray, then panic. They worship, then worry. They declare victory, then immediately start planning for defeat. That's not trust. That's spiritual multitasking. You're trying to lean on God while still leaning on your own understanding, and that doesn't work. Trust means you stop trying to be God's assistant. Some of you are exhausted because you've been trying to co-manage your breakthrough. You gave God the problem, but you kept the steering wheel. You said, Lord, take this, but then you stayed up all night figuring out how it's going to happen. You said, God, I trust you, but your mind keeps rehearsing worst case scenarios. That's not surrender. That's delegation with supervision. Real trust says, God, I don't know how you're going to do it, and I don't need to. Real trust says, I release the timeline. Real trust says, I release the method. Real trust says, I release control. Because the truth is, God doesn't need your strategy. He needs your faith. You can't outthink omniscience. You can't outmaneuver omnipotence. You can't improve on divine wisdom. So stop trying. Some of you have been praying for clarity, but clarity comes after commitment. God shows you the next step when you take the current one. He doesn't give you the whole map. He gives you enough light for the next move. That's why trust feels uncomfortable. Because trust doesn't give you explanations. Trust gives you peace. And peace doesn't come from knowing how. Peace comes from knowing who. Let me help you with something practical. Every time you feel the urge to control, that's your cue to release. Every time your mind starts racing, that's your reminder to realign. Every time anxiety tries to rise, that's your signal to surrender again. Trust is not a one-time decision. It's a daily discipline. Sometimes it's hourly, sometimes it's minute by minute. You don't trust God once and never have to do it again. You trust him in layers, you trust him in stages, you trust him every time your emotions try to take the wheel. And here's what happens when you really trust. You stop forcing relationships. You stop chasing validation. You stop begging for opportunities. You stop manipulating outcomes. You move differently. You speak differently. You wait differently. You operate from peace instead of pressure. Because when you trust God, you don't have to prove anything. You don't have to rush anything. You don't have to defend anything. You just stay obedient. And obedience attracts provision. Obedience attracts favor. Obedience positions you for doors you didn't even know existed. Some of you are one act of trust away from acceleration. But you've been stuck because you keep trying to help God instead of letting God help you. Let me say this slowly. Your job is alignment. God's job is assignment. Your job is obedience. God's job is outcome. Your job is faithfulness. God's job is fruitfulness. When you stay in your lane, God stays in his. And when God stays in his, things move that you could never move on your own. So today, stop advising heaven. Stop micromanaging miracles. Stop trying to control what only God can command. Release it. trust him and let him do what only he can do. Let's talk about the moment that changes everything, because nothing shifts until a decision is made. Every breakthrough in your life starts with a choice, not a feeling. Not a perfect plan, not a burst of motivation, a decision. Most people are waiting on God, but God is waiting on them. They're waiting to feel ready. They're waiting for conditions to improve. They're waiting for clarity, confirmation, and comfort. But heaven responds to movement, not hesitation. Faith isn't passive. Faith acts. You don't drift into victory. You decide your way into it. Right now, there are people listening who have been standing in the doorway of change for months, maybe years. You know what you need to do. You know what you need to release. You know what season you're in, but you've been negotiating with your discomfort instead of committing to your growth. And indecision is a decision. Every day you don't choose differently. You're choosing to stay the same. Let that sink in. God can open doors, but he won't walk through them for you. He can provide opportunity, but he won't force obedience. He can give you direction, but he won't override your will. Breakthrough begins the moment you stop waiting for permission and start walking in purpose. Some of you keep saying, I'm praying about it, but the truth is, God already spoke. You're not waiting on revelation. You're wrestling with responsibility. You already know the relationship you need to walk away from. You already know the habit you need to break. You already know the step you need to take. But because change feels uncomfortable, you've been delaying destiny. Here's something powerful. God doesn't bless intentions. He blesses decisions. You can intend to change and stay the same. You can intend to grow and stay stuck. You can intend to trust and still live in fear. Intentions don't move heaven. Decisions do. The moment you decide, momentum shows up. The moment you decide, grace activates. The moment you decide, things that were cloudy start to become clear, because decision creates direction, and direction determines destination. Let me say it another way. Your future is not shaped by what you want. It's shaped by what you choose. Some people want peace, but keep choosing chaos. Some people want freedom, but keep choosing familiarity. Some people want growth, but keep choosing comfort, and then they wonder why nothing changes. Breakthrough doesn't come from wishing. It comes from willingness. You have to be willing to let go of who you've been to step into who you're becoming. And that's not always easy, because sometimes your biggest enemy isn't fear. It's familiarity. You're used to how things are. You're comfortable with what you know. Even if it hurts, at least it's predictable. But God never called you to be comfortable. He called you to be courageous. Every new level requires a new decision. A decision to forgive when you'd rather hold on. A decision to trust when you'd rather control. A decision to move when you'd rather wait. And here's the truth most people miss. Your feelings will catch up to your choices. Stop waiting to feel brave before you act. Act and courage will follow. Stop waiting to feel confident before you move. Move and confidence will grow. Stop waiting to feel ready before you decide. Decide and readiness will develop. Faith goes first. Feelings come second. Some of you are one bold decision away from a completely different life, but you've been circling the same mountain because you keep postponing the pivot. Let today be different. Decide to release what's been weighing you down. Decide to trust instead of worry. Decide to obey instead of delay. Decide to move even if your hands are shaking, because God doesn't require perfection. He responds to participation. He doesn't need you to have it all figured out. He just needs you to take the step. And when you do, heaven meets motion. You'll be surprised how many doors open once you stop standing still. You'll be amazed how much lighter you feel once you finally choose freedom. You'll discover that the breakthrough you were praying for was waiting on your decision. So don't wait for another sign. Don't wait for everything to line up. Don't wait until it feels easy. Choose now. Because the moment you decide is the moment your momentum begins. Let me take you a little deeper, because this is where things start to accelerate. When you get aligned with God, movement shows up in places that used to feel stuck. Most people think progress comes from pressure. They believe if they just push harder, grind longer, and force things enough, eventually something will break loose. But that's not how the kingdom works. In the kingdom, acceleration doesn't come from striving, it comes from alignment. Alignment is simply being in the right place, with the right posture, doing the right thing at the right time. When your life lines up with God's order, resistance decreases and results increase. You've experienced this before. Even if you didn't have language for it, there were moments when everything just seemed to flow. Conversations happened at the perfect time. Opportunities appeared unexpectedly. Help came from places you didn't anticipate. That wasn't luck, that was alignment. Because when you're aligned, you don't have to chase what's already assigned. But when you're misaligned, everything feels heavy. You work harder and get less. You pray longer and feel further away. You move more but accomplish less. That's the signal that something is out of order. See, God is a God of order, and order creates momentum. Some of you have been asking God to bless something He's been trying to reorder. You've been praying for increase, but He's been calling you to adjust. You've been asking for doors to open, but He's been asking you to change direction, because blessing flows where alignment exists. Let me make this practical. Alignment isn't complicated. It starts with obedience. It looks like forgiving when your pride wants revenge. It looks like resting when your flesh wants to grind. It looks like giving when fear tells you to hold back. It looks like walking away when everything in you wants to stay. Alignment is choosing God's way over your comfort. And here's what happens when you do that. Things that were stuck start moving. People who were distant start reaching out. Ideas begin to flow again. Energy comes back. Favor shows up, not because you forced it, but because you finally got in position. Some of you are tired because you've been rowing against divine current. You've been pushing uphill in a season where God already prepared a downhill, but you missed it because you were focused on control instead of connection. Let me say it clearly. When you align vertically, things shift horizontally. When your relationship with God gets in order, everything else starts lining up behind it. Your peace improves, your decisions sharpen, your timing gets better. You stop making desperate moves. You stop settling for almost. You stop chasing things that were never meant for you. Because alignment gives you discernment. And discernment protects you from distractions that look like opportunities. Some of you have been busy but not productive. Active but not advancing, moving but not progressing. That's what misalignment looks like. You're doing a lot, but you're not going far. And God is saying, like, come back into order, not to restrict you, to release you. Because alignment is not limitation. Alignment is liberation. When you get aligned, you don't have to compete. You don't have to compare. You don't have to beg. You don't have to prove. You just become magnetic. What's meant for you starts finding you. What's assigned to you starts locating you. You move from striving to receiving, and that's when acceleration kicks in. Acceleration is when it feels like time collapses. Things that should take years happen in months. Things that seem delayed suddenly show up back to back. That's not coincidence. That's what happens when heaven backs your movement. But it starts with alignment. Alignment with God's voice. Alignment with God's values. Alignment with God's timing. And that means sometimes slowing down when the world tells you to speed up, sometimes saying no when everyone else says yes, sometimes choosing peace over popularity, sometimes choosing purpose over profit, and every time you do, you're positioning yourself for supernatural momentum. You don't need to force your future, you need to follow God, because when you follow God, you stop chasing results. Results start chasing you. So check your alignment. Check your posture, check your obedience, because when you get in God's order, everything that was stuck starts to move. Let me bring this all together, because this is where you know whether you've truly let go. Peace is proof. Not the kind of peace that comes when everything finally works out, not the temporary relief you feel when a problem pauses. I'm talking about supernatural peace, and the kind that shows up while the situation is still unresolved. That peace is the evidence that you've released control, because if you're still anxious, you're still holding on. You can say you've surrendered, but your nervous system will tell the truth. Your sleep will tell the truth. Your thoughts will tell the truth. Peace doesn't lie. Most people think peace comes after the breakthrough, but in God's system, peace comes before the breakthrough. Peace is not the reward, it's the receipt. It's heaven's confirmation that the exchange has already happened. You gave God the burden. He gave you rest. You released the outcome. He released his presence. You stopped striving. He started working. That's how it goes. If you're constantly replaying the problem in your mind, you haven't let it go. If you're checking your phone every 5 minutes for an update, you haven't let it go. If you're still trying to figure out how it's all going to happen, you haven't let it go. Because surrender doesn't keep revisiting what was already placed in God's hands. Real surrender rests. Let me say that again. Real surrender rests. And rest is not laziness. Rest is faith. Rest is you saying, God, I trust you more than I trust my own ability to control this. Some of you are tired because you've been spiritually alert 24 hours a day. You've been scanning for problems, anticipating disappointment, preparing for things that haven't even happened yet. That's not wisdom. That's worry dressed up as responsibility. Peace doesn't come from preparedness. Peace comes from partnership. When you partner with God, you stop carrying the weight alone. And here's what peace does. Peace clears your mind. Peace sharpens your hearing. Peace opens your creativity. Peace restores your energy. Peace gives you perspective. You start seeing options you couldn't see before. You start hearing God more clearly. You start making better decisions, not because your circumstances changed, but because your inner world did. Some of you don't need a new strategy. You need a calmer spirit, because a calm spirit can hear instructions that a stressed mind will miss. God speaks in peace. He doesn't compete with panic. That's why anxiety blocks direction. But peace creates access. When peace arrives, confusion leaves. When peace arrives, clarity follows. When peace arrives, timing makes sense. And here's the beautiful part. Peace protects you while God works. It guards your heart from bitterness. It guards your mind from fear. It keeps you from making emotional decisions that sabotage future blessings. Peace is your shield in the waiting season. And let me tell you something important. Peace doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop carrying. You still show up. You still do your part. You still walk in obedience. But you're no longer attached to outcomes. You're detached from pressure. You're free from the need to control. That's maturity. That's trust. That's growth. Some of you are about to recognize that the biggest miracle isn't what God changes around you. It's what he changes within you. Because when he gives you peace, he gives you power. Power to wait without complaining. Power to move without rushing. Power to trust without seeing. And that's how you know you've truly released it. You smile again. You breathe deeper. You sleep better. You laugh without forcing it. You stop checking on what you already gave to God. That's when heaven starts moving in ways you don't have to manage. So today, don't chase signs. Don't chase outcomes. Don't chase answers. Protect your peace. Because peace is your confirmation that God is already at work. And when peace is present, victory is inevitable.